In section 6.1, we wrote percents as decimals and fractions. But for section 6.2, we're going backwards. This time, we're going to write decimals and fractions as percents. So for example 1, we're going to focus on writing decimals as percents. And there are two ways to do that. So go ahead and split your workspace in half. For writing decimals as percents, one of the first ways you can do this for 32 hundredths is to say it just like I did. Not 0.32, but use your place value knowledge. 32 hundredths. If you had to think of that as a fraction, it would be 32 over 100. 32 hundredths. Well, we know that percent means out of 100. So really, we can just take this numerator and say, hey, 32 out of 100, 32 per 100 is the same thing as 32%. So that's way 1. Way 2 is really pretty simple. So here we have 544 thousandths. To change a decimal to a percent, we're just going to take the decimal and this time we're going to move it to the right 2 times. So when we were changing a percent to a decimal, we moved the decimal to the left. But when we're changing a decimal to a percent, we're moving it to the right. So our answer would be 54 4/10%. So once I've moved that decimal 2 places to the right, I need to tack on that percent sign in order for those two numbers to be equivalent. So in review, you can say the decimal properly, so 32 hundredths, and then write it as a percent, or you can just move that decimal 2 places to the right, tack on your percent sign, and that's how you get your decimal turned into a percent. Now it's your turn. For the practice problem, I'm going to give you 2 different decimals that I want you to convert using whichever method you found easier. Here, let's focus on changing 60 hundredths and 87 thousandths to percents. Go ahead and pause the video and check back in once you've solved it. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and move the decimal 2 places to the right, tack on my percent sign. So 60 hundredths becomes 60%. Now over here on 87 thousandths, again I'm going to move my decimal 2 places to the right, and that would be 8 7/10%. How'd you do? In example 2, we're going to go ahead and focus on writing fractions as percents. Split your workspace in half, and let's go ahead and convert 3/4 to a percent. Now we did this example in lesson 6-1 where we were changing this to a percent. So really, or we were changing the percent to a fraction. This should be one that you have memorized. But just in case, let's go through the procedures. Alright, so we have a fraction, and if you remember, the vinculum or the fraction bar stands for division. So you would think of this as 3 divided by 4. In your calculator, you would type in 3 first, then the dividing sign, and then the 4. When you do that, you get an answer of 75 hundredths. Well, that's a decimal, and now we need to go to a percent. So we use the rule that we learned just in example 1 of moving the decimal 2 places to the right and then tacking on the percent sign to get our answer. So 3/4 written as a percent is 75%. Okay, let's go ahead and do 2/5. Now we can do the same thing where we do 2 divided by 5 in our calculator, making sure that 2 goes in first. Numerator always goes in first, and we would get 4/10. as our decimal answer. Then we move that decimal 2 places to the right, tack on our percent sign, and we get 40%. So you can do that. That works. Or you can think about 2/5 and your knowledge of equivalent fractions. So we want a percent is always out of 100. We're going to try and figure out, well, 5 times what is 100? Well, 5 times 20 is 100. So if we do the same thing to our numerator, 2 times 20, that's 40. Since it's out of 100, 40 out of 100, percent means out of 100. 40 out of 100 is also 40%. Now the second way that I just showed you, 2/5, that works when a number is compatible with 100, meaning that 5 has to be able to go into 100. If we look back at 3/4, you'll notice that, hey, 4 does go into 100. 4 times 25 gives me 100. So 3 times 25 would give me 75, which is also 75%. These two examples, those compatible numbers methods work. However, if you had a denominator of something like 21, well, 21 doesn't go into 100, so you can't use this method. So if you go ahead and do your numerator divided by your denominator, change that to a decimal, and then move your decimal 2 places over to the right to make it to a percent, that will always work, just like we did up in this part right here. Okay, let's do a couple practice problems. I want you to convert 3/8 to a percent and 7/25. So go ahead and pause the video, convert both of these fractions into percents, and then check back in once you have your answers. Okay, 3/8. Well, 8 isn't compatible with 100. It doesn't go into 100, so I can't really do that trick I showed you just a minute ago. So I really have to think about this fraction as a division problem. So 3 divided by 8. Numerator goes first into your calculator. The decimal answer that I get would be 375 thousandths. From the decimal form, I need to go ahead and move my decimal 2 places to the right and tack on that percent sign. So 3/8 written as a percent is 37.5%. Now looking back at 7/25, well, 25 goes into 100. So I can use that compatible number and equivalent fraction method. 25 times 4 gives me 100. And whatever I multiply in the denominator, I also have to do to the numerator. So 25 times 4 is 100, and 7 times 4 is 28. 28 out of 100, percent means out of 100. So 28 out of 100 would be 28%. How'd you do? Okay, let's use our knowledge of the different rational number forms, percent, fraction, and decimal, to order numbers from least to greatest. I'm going to give you 3 numbers, and you're going to need to order them from least to greatest. First one I have is 72%. Then we have 35/54. And finally we have 6/10 repeating. So that would be 0.66666666666 on forever and ever and ever. That's what that little bar above the 6 means. It means repeat. Okay, in order to compare these, we have a percent, we have a fraction, and then we have a decimal. We want these all to be in one form, either all percents, all fractions, or all decimals. And I don't know about you, but I find it easier to compare decimals because I think about money. So let's go ahead and change the non-decimal rational numbers to their decimal form. So I need to focus on converting 72% to a decimal and then 35/54ths to a decimal. Okay, so remember when we were doing 72%, to change it to a decimal form, we're just going to take the decimal at the end of 72 and move it 2 places to the left. So 72% is the same thing as 72 hundredths. And 35/54ths is a fraction. So to change that fraction to a decimal, we need to remember that a fraction is just a division problem. Numerator goes first, 35 divided by 54. Type that in your calculator and you get 648 thousandths as your decimal approximation of 35/54ths. And just to make sure that we're going to compare our decimals correctly, we need to remember that because this repeats, let's just go ahead and expand it out. I've got 2 decimal places here, 3 decimal places here, so let's go ahead and have 3 decimal places for this one. So 6/10 repeating to 3 decimal places would be 0.666. Okay? And if I were to tack on a 3rd decimal place to 72 hundredths, that would be a 0. Alright, so I'm looking for the smallest of those. 648 thousandths, 666 thousandths, or 727 thousandths. If I look at the decimal form, 648 thousandths is the smallest. So that means that 35/54ths is the least rational number out of all of those. I want to write it back in its original form. Second comes 6/10 repeating, and then finally 72%. So in order to order rational numbers, you need to make sure that they're all in the same form. Then you can compare them to see which one's larger and which one's smaller. Write them back in their original form, and then you've got your answer.